Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Your Views on the News with me, Azad Ali. Now, this evening we're talking about Iraq 10 years on. Has Iraq, the situation for Iraqis and Iraq improved after the invasion by the West, in particular UK we're talking about, and the weapons of mass destruction, which nobody managed to find. We heard a lot of rumours about that it was kind of smuggled out of the country and it might be in another country somewhere in the desert. But just before the break, we have been taking some calls, and Asma made some, she made some really good points there. And I think let's take some of them. First one, I mean, she mentioned about the start of the war, about Kuwait and everything else. What do you think?
I think Asma is a little bit unclear about how it started. Actually, Iraq was the one at fault. Iraq went into Kuwait, they occupied Kuwait, and because they occupied Kuwait, there was this war against Iraq. But that was in 1991.
That's right, yeah.
And she made a reference to the incubators, the children, and that was one of the biggest lies that was used at that time. But basically, Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1991. There was a war against Iraq, and Iraq was pushed out of it. But then Iraq was devastated for 10 years with sanctions that killed almost 1 million people.
Especially a lot of children.
A lot of children. You have Madeleine Albright, who was asked, was the price worth killing 500,000 babies to remove the regime? And she said she thought the price was worth it. So this was how it started. Yeah. But then in 2003, the Americans went and occupied Iraq and destroyed it. And they had what was called the shock and awe war. That one, I have my family, they tell me that it actually is a shock and awe because you feel your heart inside you shaking with the bombing that was taking place. Yeah. It's an amazing thing they've done, and this is a city of 4 million people. Yeah. You just send
it's completely destroyed.
It's an amazing thing.
Yeah. Okay. Zaman from London is on the phone. Let's see what Zaman has to say. Assalamu alaikum, Zaman.
I propose solution to Iraqi problem now.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Okay.
Still from Nigeria.
Okay, Sadiq, what can we do for you? What are your views?
I have a question for the speaker.
Yes, sure.
All right. It's not Saman, it's still from Nigeria.
Yes, carry on.
All right. My question is, what solution can he provide for the people in Iraq now? Because Iraq is having problems.
Yes.
Iraq is having problems. From Nigeria, I'm not from London. Iraq is having problems. What solution can he provide for them?
Okay. Jazakallah khair. We actually have come to that, but we will touch on it again. No problem. Let's see who else is waiting on the line. Hello, assalamu alaikum.
Okay.
Hello, assalamu alaikum. Hasnat.
Assalam.
Assalamu alaikum, Hasnat. Okay, we seem to have lost Hasnat. Anyway,
hello, hi, I'm here.
Ah, you're here. Brilliant. Yeah. I was just about to give up on you. Anyway, thank you for joining me this evening. What are your views on Iraq? What do you think is happening?
Well, to be honest, I'm following these sort of... hello?
Yeah, carry on. I can hear you, Hasnat. Hasnat? Okay, I think we lost Hasnat there. Anyway, please, Hasnat, call back and we will come back to you. Just going back to some of the other points Asma raised, the issue about the oil. Now, everyone that I know were convinced the only reason the West is going in there is to actually for economic gain, in essence, the oil.
That's correct. The war is oil. And even if the US does not import the oil from Iraq, if it controls the oil from Iraq, it can control the Far East, it can control Japan, it can control China, it can control all the other countries which import oil from there, and indeed many of the African countries. So Iraq had concession holding companies. It was under control until 1972. Iraq nationalized its oil in 1972. It became a national oil company, run nationally. Now this government, which is the Americans have brought there, are signing contracts with everybody on the system of the old system of concessions. And I don't want to be too technical, but basically the idea is that if you have oil, you can bring in companies to help you to produce, and they get paid for their services. That's one way, which is acceptable, although they may charge too much, but that's an acceptable thing. But there is another way, which used to be pre-2007, and now it's coming back, whereby the oil companies, where they come and help to produce the oil, they become the owners, and they give you money.
So is this how it's being done now?
This is how it's being done now.
So,
So we are going back.
Which companies actually benefit the most?
The oil industry, one of its biggest thing is that you actually don't know what's happening. There are the Seven Sisters, the major companies, but there are a lot of little companies who are not necessarily owned by them. But if they buy the oil, in fact, the majors can send their oil somewhere else. But at the present moment, you've got many companies from Britain, from France, from
for our viewers to understand, are ordinary Iraqis, or Iraq as a country, is it getting more money now that Saddam's gone, or is it getting less when Saddam was here?
Well, certainly it's getting much, much, much more, because during the period of sanctions between 1991 and 2003, Iraq was not allowed to trade. Iraq was under blockade. It was allowed to sell just a little bit of oil, so that in theory, the oil money goes to the UN, and then Iraq, if they want to buy food, they go to the UN and ask the UN to allow them to buy food. So that's why it is called Oil for Food program. Right, And the net result of that, despite the fact that now Iraq is getting huge amounts of money, it cannot even be compared to the periods of sanction. But if you take the life of an ordinary Iraqi now and compare it with the life of an ordinary Iraqi pre-2003, even under sanctions, and if you test it objectively, i.e. you check education with education, health with health, employment with employment, safety with safety, freedom with freedom, if you compare everything, it is 100 times worse than what it was, even under sanctions, with the exception that they have now mobile telephones.
Subhanallah. Okay, let's go back to our phone lines. I believe Zaman is back from London. Assalamu alaikum, Zaman.
Hello, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. How are you?
Good evening. Good evening to you and to your friend. Assalamu alaikum. And I'm all right. You're talking about 10 years of Iraq.
10 years after, yes, the Iraq invasion.
Before 10 years, Iraq was in the pocket of the West. After 10 years, Iraq is still in the pocket of the West. The oil is, there, and the gentleman sitting next to you said that they invaded Kuwait. Saddam Hussein was lured into Kuwait. The American ambassador asked them, what about Kuwait? And they said, we don't mind about Kuwait, what you do. He invaded it, and that was the, thing to attack Iraq. 7 years Iraq and Iran were fighting. Lenin, Vladimir Lenin, the Russian the revolutionist, his girlfriend said to him, war is a very terrible, terrible, terrible thing. And Lenin said, yes, it's very, very terrible thing, but it's terribly, terribly profitable thing.
Yes.
The question is, they fought 7 years. As far as the West is concerned, it is, until and unless they sort themselves out, the West is not going to sort, they are living in a dream world. Actually, they are still now the Africa. Now the next 10 years and 15 years, the West will be looking in Africa. The Afghanistan, the gentleman is saying about Iran. Is Saudi Arabia a friend of Iran? They are killing. The potent power in a Muslim world is forbidden. Global divisions, religious divisions, tribal divisions, which turns them into scattered pieces, are easy to chew and swallow. Until unless they put their house in order, West is never going to put their house in order.
Thank you for your call. Okay, let's go to Luqman, who's calling from Nigeria. Hello, assalamu alaikum.
Yeah. Wa alaikum salam.
Yes, can you just put your volume down, please, Luqman, and then tell us your views or questions?
Okay, thank you very much. The problem generally is that the media is controlled by the Western countries, and it's so sad that a lot of things happen, and they only tell us what they want us to hear. The only channel I believe in, I trust so much, is the Islamic channel, which I'm watching at the moment. A lot of nasty things happen all over the world, and we only get to hear whatever they want us to hear. I was fortunate to have been to Libya and some other countries, and I know the way they lived. They were happier than what they have today. They have contributed to a lot of problems in the Islamic world. So I would like to also talk about that, because they control the media. The only channel I trust is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for the vote of confidence there, Luqman. Media, I mean, he's raised the points. Media is very biased. It does really project the agenda of its editorial lines or its proprietor. I mean, if we think about it, Iraq, on a daily basis, every week there are at least more than 50 to 100 people being killed. But we don't see any of that on our televisions anymore.
That's correct, yes. Because I'm privileged to be able to watch the Arabic stations as well as the Western one, you will be forgiven to think you're living in two different worlds. The events that take place in Palestine and in Iraq and in Lebanon and in Syria, they are covered by that kind of media much more than it is covered by the Western media. This is number one. Number two, the Western media has an agenda, even our BBC, which is in theory, it's a taxpayers paid for, etc., which is independent and impartial. The BBC has to follow the line of the presents it in a different way. So the Western media does not give you the picture as it is, it gives you the picture that it wants you to see. But nowadays, also we have to realize that with the new technology, there are a lot of, you can see YouTubes, you can see other channels, there are channels in other languages. There are, for instance, there is Al Jazeera, which is an Arabic station, but it is in English. And there are other stations where people can see, there are the emails, there are the various ways of following the news. But I think the most important element is that the person must be really on the lookout for the truth. Examine it, ask, what are they talking about? Do they have an ulterior motive in it?
I think as time has gone along, especially with what took place in Iraq, I mean, trust in politicians has gone down, and trust in media, with especially with the phone hacking, has also gone down a lot as well. Okay, let's go to Steele from Nigeria. Assalamu alaikum.
Hello.
Hello. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
You're on air. What are your views?
Okay. You see, I just want to quickly contribute and add to what the speaker has just said. You see, the problem we have presently in the Arab world, generally, apart from Iraq, is that everybody wants to put impression that they are in control. But the Americans, they want to show the world that they are in control and they are in power. And that is why they are in Iraq till today. And look at it. We have to find a way where, because he made mention of the fact that people come to America as investors to come and invest in their oil. And prior to that time, Iraqis, an average Iraqi man, suffering, and that is where I want the Muslims world to look at. That the suffering of an Iraqi man is a suffering for all Muslim communities that are Muslim there. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Very interesting comments there. Let's go to our next caller. Hello, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. And I have a question about the day the Saddam Hussein have been hanging. And then the hanging exactly the Eid of the Islam Day.
Yes, that's right. He was,
Yeah, and why they choose that day? Why they not cannot hang him another day? Because this was very sad day for the Islam, I think.
Okay,
that's my question.
Okay, thank you, sister. Very good question. Well, let's come back to this question that the sister asked from Birmingham. Now, prior to the invasion of Iraq, Saddam Hussein wasn't someone that was loved by the Muslim world, especially the public. They never thought he was a hero. They never, shouted his name. But, they always had concerns about what he was doing, how he was treating people. They always had these concerns. But when he was hanged, one thing I noticed is across the world, there was a lot of sympathy for him.
Human beings always sympathize and empathize with injustice. Anybody who is treated unjustly. Saddam Hussein, regardless of whatever people say about him and regardless whatever he's done, at the end of the day, he did not have a fair trial. He was hanged contrary to the Iraqi penal code. You don't hang people on holidays, on Fridays, on Eid Day. And on top of that, he actually, he is the only person that he died in front of millions while he's saying the Shahada. When he actually fell, he was halfway through Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. The other thing is a guy he showed that he's brave. He refused to have his face covered. He wanted to show the people that he is a patriot. So he said, "Long live Palestine," when he's on the gallows. In fact, I know that one of the things that on the general public in the Islamic world and the Arab world, in fact, Saddam Hussein was seen in a good light. He was voted as the man of the year, I can't remember, 96 or something. He's a person who's seen that he's standing against the West, he's standing against Israel. Of course, there are all these stories about the mass killing and about torture and about all this, but the people, generally speaking, try and find a hero figure. And at his time, unfortunately, when you compare him with all the other presidents, whether in Saudi Arabia or kings or in Egypt or whatever, he stood taller than all of them. He stood for the principles, he was helping those who were in need.
I mean, you mentioned torture, and of course, what Iraq did, if there was something, is open millions of people's eyes in the duplicity and what the West actually says one thing and what it does, because the evidence of the torture, horrendous torture.
It's actually worse than that. You see, first of all, it is unimaginable that you have so much torture in Iraq, either by the Americans themselves or with the acquiescence. And the Americans, we all seen the pictures in Abu Ghraib, and we've seen all the other abuses. That's number one. Number two, there were a lot of torture with the acquiescence, with the agreement, with the approval of the Americans. Then you have, even after they didn't know, they allowed torture to take place, while under the Geneva Convention, it is the duty of the occupying force to ensure that the civilians shall not be mistreated. So that's one aspect which is so bad. But the second aspect, which is until now, until today, there is lack of recognition about the torture which is taking place. I've recently seen the Foreign Office here. There are that much documentation of the UN about the torture and the Human Rights Council. And yet, the permanent representative of the United Kingdom in the Human Rights Council in Geneva, he welcomes the improvement of human rights taking place in Iraq. And you say to them, what are you talking about? Why can't we just treat Iraq? Oh, Iraq is an independent state and we don't want to interfere. So I asked whether we have the same feeling when we go to China and we talk about the human rights abuses, or when we go to Africa and we talk about the human rights. Why are we? Because Iraq is a regime that we claimed here in the West, that this is democratic.
And more than that, there is this kind of pantomime taking place to present Iraq as a successful project. And that would explain. I mean, I've heard many commentators speak that, the reason you don't hear about Iraq and the reason that, most of the population is fed good stories about Iraq is how else are they going to, maintain their facade of success?
I agree with you fully. I've recently spoke to a very senior European diplomat, and I said to him, because we talked about the situation in Iraq and he was fully aware of all the, so I said, if it is that bad, why Iraq is not on the screen, on the radar screen? He wouldn't give the answer. I said, do you want me to ask the question again? He said, okay, fine. He said, look, we said it's a correct war and we know it was illegal. We said we're going to spread democracy and we didn't. We said it's going to be wonderful and we know it isn't. He said, are you surprised we don't want to talk about it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is what it is.
Absolutely. And just going back to the other question that came about is being in control. you know, many of the countries themselves, they don't have full control of what's happening in the country. So at the moment in Iraq, though there is an Iraqi government in place, it's not really in control of the country as...
No, not at all. The vivid example of three nations, in my view, is Afghanistan, Iraq, and Somalia. Whatever you want to call it, there is no government there. You have a situation in Iraq, for instance, the whole government and parliament and the embassies, they are all in some few square kilometers in Baghdad, which is called the Green Zone, which used to be
that's still there.
They are still there. Yeah. Everything is there. They live there, they work there, they cannot venture out. That's number one. Number two, you have a parliament which actually each member of parliament get higher salary than the Speaker of the Parliament in the USA. They have, according to the Daily Mail here, which is not a very friendly newspaper, an Iraqi member of Parliament gets something like £600 a minute.
Wow.
Compared to the amount of work they do with the salary they get. The government cannot go outside the country. It's outside. You have the northern part of Iraq, which is the Kurdish area, is so independent that the prime minister accused the vice president of being a terrorist. And this guy, the vice president, he goes to the Kurdish area, and the prime minister cannot even reach him. And they tell him, we're not going to hand him over. You have a situation where they are totally not in control. It is the most corrupt country on the list of Transparency International. It's the most failed state in the world. Baghdad is the worst city to live in by the standard of living, on taking it objectively on security and safety and health and infrastructure and etc. So there is no government there. But nevertheless, the West want to continue. You know, even when we had Taliban in control of Afghanistan before they went there, they were more in control of Afghanistan than Karzai now. Maliki, Saddam Hussein was under sanctions and wars and continuing from 1991 until 2003. Every few years, they bombs and killing and etc. He was still in control of the country. Bashar al-Assad now, who has a problem in Syria, he is more in control of Syria with all the problems you have than Maliki in Iraq.
Wow. So that's really bad. And I think, you know, in terms of going forward, as an Iraqi yourself, you know, do you see, you know, you're passing this impasse, this terrible situation shortly?
Unfortunately, I think there is still some more problems to come. But I could see in, say, 2, 3, 4 years from now, two things happening. First of all, change in the structure in the government in Maliki. So you can have a little more realistic political and people who are a little more honest and less stealing less and being more patriotic. The second part is that the people of Iraq who have gone through blood feuds and ethnic cleansing and what have you because of the Americans built walls and what have you, encouraged them to fight, people are now beginning to go back to the idea, you know, you're my neighbor. I don't mind you are a Sunni or a Shia. We were brothers and neighbors. We had a problem, you killed my brother, I did something to your uncle or whatever. But it's time now we bury the hatches. And that's why this uprising now at the present moment,
it's more genuine.
It's more general. It's calling for the defense of the Iraqi people, that the people who are detained without trial should be released. Women must not be abused in prison. Justice must be done. Power must be shared.
There's a real revolution perhaps taking place. And one thing I did promise Asma that I will ask about Blair being taken to The Hague.
Quite honestly, I think it's not only the Iraqi people. And for Asma's information...
You have to say yes or no?
Yes, he must.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. Sorry I have to rush you. Sorry, apologies to all the callers. I couldn't take all your calls. See you next week. Take care. Assalamu alaikum.